Hi, I'm Bob Soley with Audio Authority, here to talk about the SonaFlex configuration utility. It runs on Microsoft Windows and provides an easy way to perform setup tasks on the SF-16 Matrix Amplifier. Download the free utility at audioauthority.com. The File menu allows you to import and export configuration files. The first step is to import a configuration file from your SF-16M. There are three different import-export modes you can use: File mode, Serial mode, or Telnet mode. I am using File mode in this example. In File mode, you can use a USB drive to transfer configuration files between the SF-16M and a PC. This method is great for working on the configuration off-site, and you can keep an archive of the settings as a backup or for similar installations in the future. Unit ID allows you to program one SonaFlex amp in a multi-amp system. Check the back of your SonaFlex for its unit ID. Look at the bottom bar in the utility to see which SF-16M unit you are working on and what mode you are in. The Input-Output Setup tab is where you can name and set up inputs and outputs. Any input or output can be used as a stereo pair or as separate mono channels. To set up an input, select it, click the name field, and type a name. Choose stereo or mono and click Update. The FlexPort inputs are dedicated to FlexPort Cat5 transmitters, which provide a remote connection point for different kinds of sources. Two stereo FlexPort transmitters can be used with each amp in stereo mode, or in mono mode they can be connected to 4 independent FlexPort transmitters. See audioauthority.com for details. To set up speaker outputs, enter a name, choose mono or stereo, and click Update. The Apply to All feature is useful here and on other tabs in the utility to change settings on all inputs or outputs at once. The Input-Output Assignment tab shows the current settings, including the input assigned to each output. Notice the right column shows the output mode, which changes when the input is mono versus stereo. In this tab, you can switch the input assignment on any of the outputs, but it is not intended to be a day-to-day user interface. The Levels tab allows adjustments to the input gain and output volume levels. It is best to trim the hotter input levels to match the volume of your other sources. Increasing the input gain can cause some distortion. Output levels provide a number of different settings. Adjust the minimum and maximum turn-on levels so that the audio is never too quiet or too loud at turn-on. The maximum output level limits all volume adjustments. It is often convenient to use the Apply to All Outputs button to establish a baseline setting and then adjust each output individually. Other settings on this screen are not permanent. They are there for convenience during setup. DSP settings provide a basic option for bass and treble, but for advanced features, enable Advanced DSP, where you can use up to 7 filters. Choose an output and click one of the filter types: high pass, high shelf, low pass, low shelf, or parametric. Low pass and high pass filters do not require a value in the level column, whereas a low shelf or high shelf filter does. This is how you can set up all 7 filters as a standard parametric EQ. In this example, we are setting the 7 bands at evenly spaced frequencies. Then we enter a value for each frequency, plus or minus 15 dB. Turn on loudness for areas where you need flat frequency response at low listening levels. You can create output groups when you want to apply volume and switching commands to multiple outputs at once. Define a group by clicking one of 10 groups, naming the group, and clicking Update. Select the outputs that will belong to the group. Groups can overlap, and a group can have any number of outputs. An override is an action that switches a set of outputs to a particular input at a set volume. When the override is canceled, the outputs return to the previous input and volume. To set up an override, select an override, choose an input, and set a priority, 1 being the highest. Then enable the outputs that should respond to the override and set the volume for each output. Once again, you can turn on Apply to All Outputs to establish a baseline. FlexPort override inputs are preset. Overrides, including FlexPort overrides, can be triggered by serial or Ethernet commands, or by the contact closure terminals on the rear panel of the SF-16M amp. FlexPort overrides can also be triggered by the override button on the FlexPort transmitters. In the Scene Preset tab, you can set up 10 sound scenes. A scene is different from an override in that you can designate multiple inputs in one scene, and a scene can't be canceled like an override. You also have other settings such as mute and power state in a scene. Select a scene, name it, configure the options on the right, then click on the next scene you want to define. On the Miscellaneous tab, you can set up the SF-16M for Ethernet using DHCP or static IP settings. When using a third-party controller over Ethernet, it's best practice to use static settings to make certain the IP address doesn't change after a power loss. Set up the system trigger to respond to audio sense only, or audio sense plus 12 volt trigger. You can set up the 2 contact closures to trigger sound scenes or overrides. The contacts can be either momentary or toggle. Choose the number of override or sound scene. If you are using a momentary switch, you can choose one sound scene on contact and a different scene on release. You can lock out the front panel controls and/or the IR sensor on the SF-16M front panel. The sleep timer turns off the front panel lights. The display has 4 brightness settings. The Status tab shows the commands being sent and received on import and export. Keep listening for a few more tips and best practices. This software is intended as a setup tool and does not provide live control or feedback from the connected amp. When using third-party controllers, you can use Telnet or serial, but use the serial port when possible to ensure the most robust communication connection. Some additional setup is required to use FlexPort transmitters. See the FlexPort manual for details. The unit ID selection dictates which of the connected amp's data is imported or exported. As a best practice, once you have all of your settings finished, put the software into the file mode and save them to the PC before you change back to serial or Telnet to export your settings to the SonaFlex. That way, if you accidentally export the wrong configuration, you can still import your saved configuration file to the software utility and export it to the amp. It is possible to open a saved configuration file in Notepad or any text editor and manually edit it. This can be handy when configuring a system with multiple amps, and all you need to do is change the unit ID. Using Find and Replace, You can change all of the unit IDs in one shot, save the file. You can then import it into the utility software or even import it directly to the SonaFlex using a USB drive. Thank you for your business. If you have any questions, give us a call or visit our website.